something that Jung named explicitly, is that if we have this sort of inner dissociation, this intrapsychic intolerance for something within ourselves, that just moves outward. And whatever embodies that thing in our relationships or in the collective in some form will show them that same level of intolerance and antagonism as we show that quality in ourselves.
Dylan Francisco, it's great to have you back on the podcast.
Great to be with you again. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, you're one of my few returning guests. I think this is maybe your third or fourth time on the
Yeah,
podcast, which is really nice. I love keeping these conversations going.
same. It always, I always come out of it learning more than I brought with me. So that's always a good exchange.
Yeah, and I've gotten like really good feedback on our conversations that people enjoy how we're kind of actively exploring ideas that
Yeah,
you're not just coming on and giving like your lecture that you might give to a class or something, but that
right.
you're open to like exploring the topics. And I really enjoy that too. And I think that's why I love having you back.
Yeah, no, same. I like learning through conversation. There's something that comes out in that you can't prepare for, and that's nice.
Yeah. I'm just noticed, I have to say, your bookshelf, you've got like 2 layers of books.
I do. I have a problem.
Or
My
you
wife
haven't had to
reminds me
move in a
often.
while.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'll have to get a U-Haul just for that when if we ever move.
Yeah, you might need to, I don't know if you've got a basement where you are, but you might have to put in some reinforcements in the foundation soon.
Yes, yes. I mean, the I built those bookshelves when we moved in, and I made sure they were stable for sure.
It's great. Sometimes people do comment privately to me about, people I have on and the bookshelf thing. Like it's the standard backdrop.
Yeah,
And so people are like always checking it out, you know? And I think
yeah,
yours is the first one that's like 2 layers deep and also like right up to the ceiling.
yeah, yeah. No, my wife made me promise that I wouldn't overflow this room, so I do what I have to do. So
Well, man, you're definitely a lifelong student, I'm sure.
I am. I love it.
Yeah, me too. Speaking of which, you gave a talk recently, I think, at the Santa Fe, what is it, a Young Society down there?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so you gave a talk on the warrior archetype as
Yes.
a cultural and psychological necessity. And that perked up my ears because I work a lot with warrior archetype and Robert Moore's framework when I work with men.
Yeah,
And yeah, I thought you had some interesting takes on the warrior that I wanted to bring out. So let's lay some groundwork. Like, why did
yeah.
you think it was important to have this conversation now?
It's been something that's been coming back to me recently, just because of for me, the multiple layers of conflict that we see in the world that only seem to be getting worse. Of course, political and national conflicts and religious conflicts, and that's has filtered down into families and marriages, and it just seems like there's a heightened level of positions being in opposition and people trying to, win those fights. And I'm just sort of, I've been trying to search for a different or some model that would actually resolve or at least address rather than perpetuate these ongoing splittings and oppositions and antagonisms.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. It's like division all the way down. It's like a
Yeah.
wedge that goes right down into the individual. And so I think part of working with the warrior archetype is starting with that internal split, internal division.
Yeah. I mean, that's for me, and that's something that Jung named explicitly is that if we have this sort of inner dissociation, this intrapsychic um, intolerance for something within ourselves, that just moves outward. And whatever embodies that thing in our relationships or in the collective in some form will show them that same level of intolerance and antagonism as we show that quality in ourselves. So that antagonism starts within.
Hmm. Well, let's talk about the warrior archetype because in my reading of Jung, and I'm by no means a Jungian scholar, but I dip into the books that I find interesting.
Yeah.
I don't recall him talking too much about a warrior archetype. You know, that came, I think, later with the post-Jungians.
Yeah.
But did you
No,
find anything about Jung talking about the warrior? I mean, he talked about
no,
war, right?
there's not a lot if anything on the warrior. He talks about the hero a lot, but I think those need to be differentiated.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I think it's more it's sort of gathering up or bringing in post-Jungian and beyond depth psychological literature, indigenous perspectives on the warrior, and sort of making ties to depth psychological principles that I think the warrior embodies, though Jung didn't explore that explicitly.
hmm. Okay. Well, how would you, I don't want to say define the warrior archetype, but let's describe some of the qualities that are constellated around that image.
Yeah, for me, one of the most helpful ways of getting into what the warrior archetype embodies is contrasting it. And I did this in my lecture for the Santa Fe Society of Young, is contrasting it with what I call the soldier and the guru. And I'm just for the sake of this conversation, I'm not personalizing those. I'm using those terms to sort of capture something I want to point out. So I don't mean them in derogatory ways towards individuals. Um, but for me, the soldier and the guru try to get at conflict in ways that are themselves based on dissociation. So the soldier has to get into a mode in which they can kill the enemy. And for me, they have to shut down something human about themselves necessarily to get into that psychological space for carrying out a mission. And so there's this corollary that I have to shut down something in me in order to attack you. And so that in itself goes back to Jung's view that, well, if the soldier requires this dissociation from something in themselves, they're in fact embodying conflict again. And therefore, that can't really ultimately address conflict because it perpetuates it, it's based on it. Uh, the
Hmm.
guru to me is the same thing, a different direction, but the guru wants to, in my terms, transcend conflict. I want to get above anger and jealousy and fear. And so I, again, in my terms, there's something split off, left behind. I'm gonna separate from these human elements in order to find a place of peace. Again, for me, that's a false approach because it requires this level of disowning. I know there's different spiritualities in relation to the guru that would be different than what I've articulated, but for my frame of reference, I want to like articulate a transcendence of the human condition in the guru that I think requires a level of splitting that again only perpetuates conflict because it is based on an inner conflict, an inner dissociation.
Mm. Hmm.
The the warrior to me is the contrast to those, that the warrior has to have the courage to stay in relationship with all elements of being a human person in community. And that requires an enormous amount of bravery because it means facing, sitting with, not running from um, fear, anger, the things that we either want to project or disown. The warrior has to hold those. And so to me, the warrior epitomizes a capacity for wholeness that can't shy away from the difficult and the human because they have to utilize their full humanity or they can't protect the humanity of their community.
Hmm.
And for me, that's that corollary. That's why, and you can, I'm talking a lot, but that's why to me, the soldier at a cultural level has to be separated, has to be put elsewhere. And the guru does the same. They take their community outside of the collective because the collective is somehow um, dissociated from what the soldier has to do. So you can't just plop a soldier back into human community because they've disowned something about their humanity, and that interaction becomes dangerous.
Hmm.
The warrior has to live in community, so they can't disown their humanity. They have to keep participating and defending the fully human.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this is maybe due to my background as a yoga practitioner, but and I thought this in your presentation as well, that for me, maybe a better figure to represent what you're talking about with the spiritual transcendence
Yeah.
is the sadhu,
Yeah, that's
right? So
good.
the sadhu is the spiritual practitioner, practices asceticism,
Right,
and usually living outside of conventional community because the community is seen as corrupting or an obstacle to
right.
your transcendence, right?
Yes.
And I just like the kind of alliteration soldier and sadhu more than
Yeah, that's
soldier
good.
and
I like that a lot. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at is this that there does seem to be reflected in that kind of archetypal expression of spirituality, or if you don't want to call it archetypal, that way of spirituality in which I'm trying to get away from something. Something is antagonistic to my spiritual state. And to me that tells us something. That means I can't face this other thing. It disrupts me. And I think the warrior is a place of being undisturbed with all of it, a capacity to face all of it.
hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's not a very robust spiritual awakening if you can't maintain whatever state that you've cultivated
Correct.
in relationship to others. Like I always joke with people that, it's really easy to be the yogi up in the cave in the mountains away from everybody because there's like really nothing around to trigger
Yes.
you or no one to reflect back your attitude or your emotions or whatever it is.
Yeah. No,
Um, but
it's
come down
become
from the
almost
mountain and get back into the village
yes,
life or family life, and you really put your spiritual realization to the test.
100%. I mean, it's become almost comical now, like the person that embarks on a spiritual path and then goes home for Thanksgiving and everything unwinds. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
or they get stuck in a traffic jam and then their enlightenment is gone. Like,
Oh
and
yeah,
I
I've
think
seen
it's
that a few
true.
times. I spent some time with gurus, and yes, it's a real thing. And I love, what Ram Dass said back in the day that you think you're enlightened, go spend a weekend with your family.
Yeah. And I think that's why, at least, looking in the context of the warrior in indigenous communities, the warrior is not separated from family, separated from community life. And I think that that's very telling that the warrior has to be at peace with all of that, or they'll find themselves at war with it. But the fact that that's the warrior in indigenous communities is not placed elsewhere, I think tells us what's asked of them. They have to be present to all of it and find it worthwhile and spiritually meaningful to stay in community while being a warrior.
hmm Yeah, I was just reflecting, as you're laying this out, that there's something there in that differentiation between soldier and sadhu. Like the soldier, because of what they have to do to dissociate, they become a danger to the community, and the sadhu, because their relationship to the transcendent is so tenuous that the community is a danger to their enlightenment, let's say.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really
that
good.
that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like the way that we raise up soldiers in Western society, you think is different than what would happen in a traditional or indigenous society? Like
I
the whole
think
idea,
so.
I mean, there is something about like probably some sort of initiatory process where you're taken out of the community to
Yeah,
cultivate some certain qualities, right?
for sure.
But it's
But I
maybe the kind of return is where we
yes.
have the most problems, and we see that with all of the vets who, suffer when they come home. Uh,
Yeah. I think that's the real key to this distinction is that return home is the sort of the completion of the training. I have to be with these people and protect this community, and that that requires a different kind of presence and bravery and humanity than I can habituate myself to this dissociated state because I'm placed elsewhere and I don't have to engage with family life and these everyday responsibilities. But when that task does come, it's almost impossible. It's an enormously difficult transition, which tells us again something about what has happened to the humanity of the soldier, that returning to human community is is an almost impossible trial.
mhm. Yeah, why do you think we in the West are so bad at that? The return, the welcoming back, the reintegration.
I think we don't know what we've done to the soldier.
Hmm.
I I I think there's sort of a lack of awareness of what the soldier has to do psychologically to to be a part of the mission, and we don't know how to undo that. Since we don't know what happened, we definitely don't know how to address it on their way out of that context. And so
Hmm.
if we don't see that we've partitioned their humanity and then send them home, like of course we're just like, well, get it together, dude. And it's like, no, I've constructed this separation so that I could be this. And now the very thing that I separated from, I have to get access to be in relationship over here. And that to me is extra, it must be extraordinarily painful
Hmm.
to because that's what was drilled out of them are the very qualities that they need to exist when they return to family communal life.
Hmm. And it's too deep for something like a cognitive behavioral therapy
Yeah,
to touch, which is going to be focusing on alleviating symptoms only.
yeah,
But it's not working at that deep inner division
correct.
or dehumanizing,
Yeah.
which is maybe why they're having so much success with psychedelics in
Yes.
helping soldiers return and
Yeah,
reintegrate.
because it's sort of, at least for a while, probably allows a great degree of disillusion of that partition.
Mm,
So that they're maybe sort of inhabiting their humanity experientially and get access to what is on the other side of that partition, that they've spent years living without.
hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And as we're talking about this, I'm getting these memories of a way to reintegrate that I witnessed that was different. So when I lived in Montreal from 2017 to 2020, one of the projects that I worked on there was teaching yoga at an Indigenous healing center that was specifically set up to help men who are coming out of the prison system integrate back into their community.
Right,
And it was like an experimental model because what they were doing was having the men live communally, but engage in indigenous rituals of healing.
right,
And for a lot of them, they had actually never experienced that before they went to prison, which is maybe part of the reason why they went into a life of crime, etc.
right.
So it was like it was bigger than just like a halfway home. But there was something about it that I just thought could apply to so many of us, even, colonial folks,
Yeah,
who aren't indigenous to this place. But there's something about that model that it involved ritual, that it involved kind of earth-based wisdom,
yeah,
communal living,
yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. Creativity, like they had a wood shop there where guys were learning how to carve and make drums and things like that. So it was this whole kind of like, I don't know, soulful experience. It was really
Yeah.
beautiful to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would go a long way if we just marked it as an important, like, task and threshold, that we ritualized the return to human community, just like made a mark of, like, this is something big you're about to do. But I think we don't ritualize that departure from um soldier life to community life. It's just like, now take off the uniform and put on your other clothes, and the change is over. And I think that doesn't speak to the psyche. I think what you're describing is like the psyche needs these embodied modes of marking change. And without that, we lose a recognition of the change that is both required and or happening without us. And then we're just getting dragged along for the ride. And it's not a conscious process that we're integrating and then can sort of carry with us. It's just happening to us.
Mm. Yeah. Although, like when you listen to veterans, they will talk openly about how they've had um, to do this dissociating, this partitioning of their humanity, right? To become a kind of a killing machine.
Yeah,
But that I think would be a very hard thing for the military, for the government to admit that
for
that is
sure.
what they're asking of these men and women who they're sending off to war. That might change people's opinions about warfare and soldiering and all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's in some ways that's where the denial starts. That's where the dissociation starts, is no, we're we're just training people to be brave and carry out and defend freedom. And like, no one wants to talk about what you have to do to yourself to frame an entire group of humanity as other and enemy, like this sort of erasure of humanity that we do to the other. We don't recognize that that requires some inner amputation to be able to do. And yeah, I don't think the military or the government wants to acknowledge that because that, that is not a good selling point.
No, no. And gosh, what was the U.S. Army's motto for the longest time? It may still be, but be all you can be.
Yes,
So what they're selling is actually like potential and
correct.
wholeness.
Yep.
And then whenever I travel to the States, it's always a shock to me to turn on the TV and look at what kind of commercials are being fed to people. Aside from the pharmaceutical stuff, which we
Yeah.
don't have up here, it's illegal up here, but to see all of that going on, but then also to see these military ads,
Yes.
which when I saw them, I was like, is this a trailer for a movie or is this a
Right.
trailer for a really cool new video game? Oh no, no. At the end, you get the tagline, it's sign up.
Yep.
This could be you, that you could be living this adventure.
Yep.
So there's something about that now too, like with the video games, is allowing it to become this whole fantasy that you could actually enact and participate in, and nothing of the kind of devastating blow to your humanity.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, it is. It's become, yeah, they're indecipherable now. The military ads and movie ads, you could juxtaposition them and not, you took the labels out of them, you wouldn't know what you're watching. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure there's got to be some, with the state of Hollywood now, there's got to be some out of work
Oh,
directors from Hollywood who are being hired to create these really expensive productions.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah, and there's something about now too, like modern warfare with drones and everything that's done remotely, that is so akin to video games, where games become like a training. But there's something about that that is also kind of facilitating the
Yeah,
dissociation and the dehumanizing, right?
for sure. I mean, it's just another level of anonymity and distance, uh, to where you're not inserting the knife or pulling the trigger, but hitting the keypad, hitting the keys on the keypad. And that makes us feel better. But I don't think psychologically, I don't think it registers any different. I think there's at some unconscious level, your soul still knows you're hitting the key.
Right. That
And
that
that's
target
feeling
is
some,
a human
yeah,
being.
yeah,
Hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about maybe the positive attributes of a warrior, because a lot of people's reaction to this, especially in the spiritual scenes, is obviously war is bad, aggression is bad, anger
right,
is a negative emotion, this kind of thing. But what I try to do in my work with men is rehabilitate this archetypal warrior potential that's in every person,
yeah,
but especially I think men, just because of
yeah.
our biology. So let's talk about that. I mean, what do you think are some of the good attributes that we should be in touch with?
Well, I think again, I think there's a great, the warrior embodies a depth of humanity, because that's, for me, that's what the warrior is ultimately defending. And that, if they're not in touch with that, if they're not connected to that, then their whole reason for being is negated. And so there has to be a level of love and compassion and value for the everyday that, for me, is a profoundly grounded and tangible kind of spirituality. Because like, if you don't value the child running through the dirt and playing outside and dinner being made and dishes being done, like, you're not going to be geared up to defend that. You have to love that. And for me, that's something really positive about the warrior, is that they that's what they're willing to defend, this context of the wholeness of life. Um, and I think that's for me where the discussion about the validity of battle, if you might say, or confrontation comes in, because if we don't have that, then we're not willing to defend wholeness. And I have a problem with that. I think that there is a valid place for this kind of response, but it has to come from something different than sort of a protection of ego. And for me, that's where the warrior takes this to a protection of wholeness. And I think they are different. I mean, how do you articulate
Hmm.
the warrior as a positive figure?
Well, for me, like the warrior archetype, the best way that I can kind of point to it is that the warrior archetype is our instinctual potential to provide and protect. I
Right.
think, like for me, the warrior is all about provision and protection. And the whole question is, okay, that's in us as a potential, and we have all of these kind of instinctual energies that come online when that's triggered or constellated. But what are we doing? What are we fighting for? Who are we looking out for?
Yeah.
All of that. So it's about, like, for me, the healthy warrior, or a way to embody a healthy warrior is like get your values in order first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of high level values, like you're saying, like wholeness, equality, justice, beauty.
Yeah.
All of those things are, I think, worth fighting for, and all of those things are under attack
Yeah.
in our current culture.
Yeah.
And so, like, within that, well, then how are you able to provide and protect? Well, you have to have some kind of like discipline.
Yeah.
And across the board, that's a quality of any warrior training is discipline and focus. Um, Something about sacrifice, like being able to go
Yeah.
without, put aside your own personal needs for the greater good,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And that is going to, allow you to direct your aggression, your power, your will in a way that is serving something greater than just yourself, or hopefully even like your nation.
Yeah. Agreed.
Um,
And
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I started to look for, like, okay, so who are some people who are kind of talking about this? And of course, Robert Moore has done a lot on the warrior. He had a lot of warrior himself, so I think he was really able to get into it and get fired
Yeah.
up about it.
Yeah.
Whereas Young, maybe he could have gone to some martial arts classes or something and gotten in touch with his warrior, and it wouldn't have come out in such passive aggressive ways,
Yeah.
like taking down all his colleagues or. um,
Yeah.
but I was thinking about, like, Carlos Castaneda as someone, like, take what him as you will, as some kind of some fraud anthropologist or whatever. But, like, I love how Daniel Noel talked about him as a shaman novelist.
Yeah.
It's like, take what he was doing as a kind of shamanic fiction that is there to kind of awaken something in the reader. And so he talked a lot about the warrior in a very different way. And I pulled this quote that I thought captured something of what we've been talking about. He says, to achieve the mood of a warrior is not a simple matter. It is a revolution. To regard the lion and the water rats and our fellow men as equals is a magnificent act of a warrior spirit. It takes power to do that. I mean, that's what you're talking about with the
Yes.
wholeness, right?
Yeah. No, and while you're talking, Castaneda was the first person to come. I've spent the last month and a half reading all of his stuff, and people have written about him. I'm not someone that ascribes to. I'm sure he has all his fallibilities like Jung did, but I find something deeply authentic about what he describes. And so, particularly in relationship to the warrior, that's where a lot I've been really sort of diving in deep into that material, because I think it frames it in this in the way you just quoted as this capacity to be in relationship to the sacredness of everything, that I'm somehow part of the whole, and if at any part like becomes more privileged or valuable than the other, then I'm not defending wholeness. And he talks about the warriors being impeccable, and it's this stance of sort of doing the right thing at the right moment in the right way every time without a personal equation becoming calculated and what serves me better. And I think that that's a really difficult place to get to, but I think that what the
To say
I
the least. Yeah.
yes, what
Something to aspire to, though.
something to aspire to, but an ideal to aspire to. Like I think
Hmm.
that that's I think we lose something culturally when we don't have the warrior as a distinct capacity, embodiment, energy that has a place in how we're responding to life. Because there's something about the warrior that is distinct that says, I will fight for this. Like that there are things worth sacrificing for, that I'm not just gonna let this thing that is of worth be invalidated by someone and
Mm.
or
Or
violated
or destroyed, yeah.
or destroyed.
Hmm.
And I think this is my sometimes my gripe with both depth psychology and spirituality is this lack of the warrior of like, yes, we value both things, but we shouldn't fight with anybody. And it's like, well, then someone's going to lay waste to everything or try to at some point, and someone at some point somebody or a group of somebody has to say no, and that has to have a place in existence.
Hmm. You know, I think a lot
Excuse
of
me.
that denial, denigration of the warrior spirit as being a part of everyone. I don't know. I kind of locate that in the kind of fallout of the 60s.
Yeah,
Obviously, like the Vietnam War was an atrocity and all of that, but also the infusion of this kind of whitewashed Eastern spirituality at
yeah,
that exact same time, I think contributed to this. Like a lot of those people who practiced yoga in the 70s or whatever, they don't understand that yogis were actually warriors back in the day.
right,
And they
right,
were like brought in to fight off the Muslim hordes and stuff like that. Like they were a fighting class.
right. And I think particularly out of Vietnam and other similar occasions that we've essentially conflated the soldier and the warrior. And therefore, when those two things are identified as the same, it's then easy to be like, well, we don't want anything to do with that. This sort of blind obedience to a command to kill. We don't want to let that we don't want what we saw in Vietnam of like we're just gonna keep at it because that's the command from on high, and that's what we do. And same with, Nazi Germany as another like, well, I was told to. Like, no, that doesn't work. And if we conflate the soldier with the warrior, we lose that differentiation of the soldier as a
Is a kind of a
dehumanized,
tool.
conditioned,
Hmm.
yeah, and the warrior as a place of wholeness and sacredness and defense of what is of value, that requires an extraordinary amount of consciousness to inhabit and to live, that is sort of antithetical to the conditions we require the soldier to inhabit.
Right. Yeah, like I was just thinking that the soldier is like a tool of empire.
Yeah,
right? And you can see that with the kind of disregard of the, the body counts of
Right.
Vietnam. It's like as long as we got enough young people to send over there, we're just going to keep going after this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And mm, yeah, I'm thinking like there's another maybe differentiation in there too. Like maybe we call it like the mercenary,
Yeah.
the soldier for hire, who's only looking out for himself, not even like thinking about the nation or
Correct.
the village or whatever, but he's looking
Yeah.
out for himself, and he's kind of like he'll go to any side that will pay.
Yeah.
And I think God, the first person that came up in my mind was Elon Musk getting hired by Trump to go in and like just cut down all of these
Yeah.
social programs and spending and everything. And it's like he says that he's fighting for something great. It's
Right.
not clear what that is, but certainly he's looking out for number one.
Right. And which is, he's getting his companies the contracts that he's eliminating for other.
Mm,
It
mm.
becomes the self-serving becomes obvious at a certain point. But I think that's one of in the conversations I'm having about the warrior, for me, that's one of the most challenging places of differentiating the warrior from other modalities is how can you differentiate the person that says I am acting on behalf of the common good but isn't versus the person that is also saying I'm attempting to inhabit this defense of the whole and are how what what differentiates the authentic from the inauthentic if both are expressing their intent to defend the common good? And I think that's a very challenging question. I'd be interested on how you would respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, yeah, you really got down to the question. Like, in order to what do we say? Let's like, in order to mobilize those kind of warrior
Yeah,
energies, you have to believe that what you're fighting for is the right thing,
yeah,
is good.
yeah,
And of course, Hitler thought what he was doing
right.
was for the good of all. So how do we differentiate? Yeah, I don't know if you can. It's hard to do in the moment, maybe. But of course, like
Yeah,
reading history backwards, we can see, well, obviously that wasn't for the
yeah.
greater good, you know.
The
Um, but in the
the
moment, I
only
think we have to rely on that internal moral compass that we
yeah,
all have. And so we
yeah,
have to not be dissociated from like our heart and our gut.
yeah,
Right? That to me is the only way. That's the only way I know how to navigate the decisions I make in my life,
yeah,
on a obviously much smaller scale with smaller consequences. But I think this is part of embodying the warrior spirit is noting that every day you're called to awaken that warrior, to get out of bed and
yeah,
not give in to lethargy or despair, but get up and get going and do what you need to do to provide for your family, for yourself, even.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I think the thread that I think you can sort of trace, and it can feel very ephemeral, that differentiates those is I do think if you follow something out, you will find in the inauthentic expression of the proclaimed defense of the good some place where someone's humanity is being sacrificed. There's going to
Hmm.
be some dehumanizing
Hmm.
that's going to come out of that because to me that expresses the state that person is in. So if
Right.
that person is in a dissociated state, they're going to inflict that on someone that they're attacking. And I think the authentic warrior, even in acting in defense, doesn't require the dehumanizing of the other. And that might feel intangible, but I think it makes a great
No,
bit of difference.
No, I think it's really good. Yeah. Because you can look at the way anyone talks about the quote unquote enemy
Yeah,
and discern that. Like whether it's Hitler talking about the Jews as like as vermin and
yeah,
all of that stuff. You hear the Christians talking about the native North Americans as savages or
yeah,
beasts.
yeah,
That's a really good marker because yeah, even on like in the culture wars, you
yes,
can discern that as well. That there's always an enemy made. It's not
yeah,
that okay, these are human beings and they're just encroaching on our territory and they're trying to take us out, but they're still human. Like
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And I that's the
listen to
and I
how they describe their enemy. Maybe that's like
absolutely.
yeah.
And I feel the same way. Like I'll feel like I'll hear people that I probably agree with in outlook on a particular political issue, but I'll hear how they describe those in opposition to that in a way that makes me feel very uncomfortable because it's an effacing. And for me, like as soon as you are participating in effacing the dignity of someone else, you you're in their same game. Like you're participating in further dehumanizing. So you're no longer in the solution side of things. And I think that the warrior is the antithesis to dehumanization, and which may seem ironic to people because of how the warrior is portrayed, but I think that that for me is whatever the warrior is doing, it's fundamentally opposed to dehumanization, even while defending or fighting against. It's first fighting against this effacing of the value of the other.
Hmm. And I don't know. I just feel the need to say too that we shouldn't romanticize indigenous cultures around this issue because if you take a look at the way a lot of indigenous societies speak about themselves, like often their name for themselves means human,
Yeah, yeah,
and everybody else is not human. And so maybe, just like I just want to like speak to that because people could be listening and thinking, well, like not all indigenous societies, there's some very kind of tribalistic, expansionist kind of indigenous societies,
yeah. No, there are no doubt uh, expressions of and were expressions of like absolute violence against other communities in indigenous societies. I think the only thing I would offer in suggestion to like most indigenous communities, their name for their own community is the people or human or something like that. But I think what was is different about that is that was not used in a, for lack of a better word, exclusionary sense because there it wasn't a it's not a monotheistic worldview. So every people can be the people in their own language. And so it doesn't necessarily require, though I'm sure it happened, but it's not based on if I'm the people, you're not the people. Just to
Mm.
just to articulate that. But I'm not to push back on the general point that humans have always been, I think, capable of dehumanizing other groups and using that devaluation as a justification for slaughter. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
like acquisition of
yes.
women, of
Yeah.
slaves, of goods,
Yeah.
of lands,
Yeah.
that's gone on everywhere. I wonder, like, I don't know, for me, like lately, the term indigenous has become one of those big words.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe we're losing some articulation with it. And so I'm even just wondering, like, about thinking like another way to talk about this kind of authentic, healthy,
Yeah.
warrior.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's something maybe take away from this. But like, so thinking about like kind of healthy expressions of that, um, I started to look at what some Native Americans have said about the warrior, just to kind of like test out this theory.
Right.
And man, I found some amazing quotes. Chief
Okay.
Seattle, he's good for some sound bites.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a great speaker. But this speaks to, I think, what you're talking to in terms of serving wholeness. Humankind is not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. And this is a separate quote, but it's good. When you know who you are, when your mission is clear, and you burn with the inner fire of unbreakable will, no cold can touch your heart, no deluge can dampen your purpose. You know that you're alive. And that to me kind of captures that warrior spirit
Yeah.
of like there's the fire, the unbreakable will, the mission.
Yeah.
Like every warrior needs a mission.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a mission in your life, um, you're gonna like find some battle somewhere else, like it's
Yeah.
unavoidable.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think that that's where uh for me particular anger comes into the equation because I consider anger a kind of sense for what threatens. And I think that it can be expressed in a very undeveloped, undifferentiated way. But I think through initiation and practice and ritual and training, anger becomes a honed sense for what threatens the whole or can. And I think that that's where this touches us individually in relationship to purpose, because I think each of us are pricked by anger in relationship to very specific things that I think are indications of this is part of what belongs to you to address, to to seek out and find a way to protect yourself, humanity, community, ecology against. And that's where again I think the warrior as embodiment of wholeness doesn't reject anger but uses that as a way to say what am I picking up on as dangerous. And I think again it can become a very refined emotional response to danger that isn't just egoically selfishly oriented. um anyway.
Yeah, I mean, looking at your anger, what pricks your anger, what stokes your anger is a really great entryway into self-knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you'll become angry at like perceived offenses,
Yes.
right? Or perceived transgressions, when really it's something that you just concocted in your own mind.
Yeah.
So like what is making me angry is a great place to start in
Yeah.
terms of like unraveling your own illusions and also like your wounding,
Yeah.
you know? That's the source, because those wounds are tender spots.
For
And
sure.
so we have to understand like where they are.
Yeah. Because
And
we're going to be moved by them. So we might as well know what we're being moved by.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then when you're in the moment, you can recognize, ooh,
Yeah.
that one, yeah, that really hit that spot. But I'm
Yep.
not gonna like react to it and take it out on this person because I know that's my wound to carry and I'm extra sensitive there.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, right? Um, yeah, and like also, yeah, because in some spiritual traditions, you get this whole thing about like not feeding anger.
Yeah.
Like, Thich Nhat Hanh, he's a beautiful man and such a peaceful guy. He would never hurt a fly, I believe, you know? But I don't think he had the greatest teachings for maybe it's like Western people or whatever, or like non-monks, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Um, But like when he talks about anger, and I think he was reacting to like maybe what was happening in some of the like encounter groups and primal therapies of
Yeah,
the 70s and 80s and stuff, where people were like kind of encouraged to express their anger by like
right.
beating up pillows and all that kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
And he would caution against that and say, no, then you're just kind of like feeding and strengthening anger. What you need to do is like kind of detach from it and watch it like a storm blowing through the sky or something,
yeah,
right? And that still doesn't put you in touch with your anger
no,
or your capacity for violence and aggression. And I think like for me, martial arts does a much better job of that,
yeah,
of like getting in touch with it and learning how to direct it in appropriate ways, you know?
yeah. Because at least from my perspective, like that act of detachment is a loss of something human, even if it's viewed as dangerous. And also, it doesn't go away. So you can think you've detached from it, but it's still there. So you've actually lost touch with something that can burn you rather than following it out and making sure you know where it is and what stokes it and what to do in relationship with it. To me, that move to separate from anger just makes us ignorant of its movements rather than better at having it around
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
responding. Excuse me.
Yeah, kind of mastering it or something. One person, one spiritual teacher that I think was really good on the warrior is Chogyam Trungpa. I don't
Oh,
know if,
yes, yes, yes.
yeah, do you ever check out his book, Way of the Sacred Warrior?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think he offers a pretty good model for what we're kind of talking about here as a healthy embodiment of the warrior spirit.
yeah. Same, same. I love that.
Like another problematic teacher, right? So, like, all
Agreed.
that aside, he
Yes.
was brilliant about some things.
Yeah.
Whether he
What
embodied it
is it
himself or
about
not.
what is it about those who are sort of deeply engaged with the warrior that become problematic? But maybe that's the point of like to enter into the warrior territory is to risk being in touch with these very challenging human aspects, and we don't always get it right and won't get it right, but better to better to attempt to be whole than tend to capitulate to dissociation. I think like if that's our option, I'd rather sort of get it wrong trying to embody the totality of experience rather than continue to participate in self-partitioning that just means I'm going to treat you in that same way.
Hmm. Yeah, and to be fair, from everything I've heard, like regarding Trungpa and his like his drinking and his womanizing and everything, um, I don't, from what I can tell, he didn't ever deny that, and he was quite open about it. So
Right.
in terms of like embracing your wholeness with all
Right.
your imperfections and everything, I mean, and same with Young too, I think in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I
Uh,
feel the same with Castaneda as like if you read his books, he's just constantly like,
this is how I
I
messed
don't
up. This,
get it. I'm so self-interested. Like this is really like all of this goes over my head. Like there's never a positioning of like I'm someone who's arrived. And for me that's what one of the things that makes it feel authentic is he doesn't isn't actually presenting himself as separate from being the particular person he is, which is all sorts of foibles and all, like the rest of us. And that, for me, that's relatable rather than problematic.
Yeah, and maybe what happened to some of these characters is not so much that they were in touch with the warrior in order to gain these insights, but that something of the guru captured
Yeah,
them, because
yeah,
of the way that other people saw them. and how kind of powerful and attractive that is to be seen
Yeah.
in that way. And, these nerdy little guys getting a lot of attention from
Yeah.
women and things like that,
Yeah.
Maybe the first time in their life they felt like, whoa, some actual personal power.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I just did a panel for a film called My Father the Hero for this Illuminate Film Festival in Santa Barbara. And the video is this as a documentary of uh, a a healer from China who gained a great bit of a huge level of notoriety, had a huge following, and lost it all because in some ways he had never sort of owned up to his own wounding. He'd never been fully human with himself, with his family. He had like had to disown so much of his experience, and he had to go back and find that and sort of had to lose everything in the process, but found himself at a much more authentic place of being whole rather than famous, basically.
Hmm.
Uh, just sort of
It's like
captures.
you kind of do this funny paraphrase of that often misquoted Jung thing about I'd rather be whole than perfect, which
Yeah.
he never actually said. It's one of those great paraphrases that sounds
Yes.
really good,
Agree.
but he didn't actually say it.
Yeah.
But it kind of captures something of what he was going
Yes.
after. But yeah, I'd rather be whole than famous is maybe another spin on it. Yep, yep.
Yeah. No, but I think this just brings us back to like the warrior is no simple path or simple task, but I think it has a specificity of what it awakens in us and what it serves. And I think if we lose that, we've lost a sort of backbone that
Hmm.
that we need, that all the other things that we find of value, if we don't have that thing that will defend those and serve those.
We're gonna lose it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing out in the world right now, at
Yeah.
least in this part of the world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. So there's something, I just wanted to touch on, like, because the word warrior has been thrown around a lot regarding the culture wars with the
Yeah.
social justice warrior, the stereotypical SJW. And I think while their hearts might be in the right place, what they do lack is a lot of that initiation and discipline and focus and containment,
Yeah.
all of that, which, they've got the heart and maybe they've got the best intentions and everything, but it's not going to be enough to stand up to, who's trying to take away freedoms and
Correct.
liberties and things like that, because they do often have those qualities of the warrior. They can emotionally detach, they can really focus in. A lot of these
Yeah.
guys are successful business people, and what is that? That takes some warrior spirit,
Yeah.
So in order to meet that with any kind of strength, kind of like the soft lefties, gotta
Yeah.
toughen up a bit.
Yeah. No, and for me, the other thing that can be very pernicious and toxic in the social justice movement, while I can value it as a whole, but there can be what can infiltrate it is its own sense of superiority over the other. And I
Mhm.
think you will find a very intense, dehumanizing, enemy making stance in a lot of ways to me that is invalidating because most of it is like trying to attack those who are dehumanizing who the social justice group is trying to protect. And it's like
Yeah.
if you're dehumanizing in response, we've gotten nowhere. We've just multiplied the dehumanization. And that's where I tend to have a problem with that because it tends to be unself-reflexive in participating in the very thing they're trying to combat.
Totally. Yeah. Again, to come back to that question, like ask yourself like how they talk about their
Yeah.
enemy, and it's
Yeah.
going to tell you like where they're coming from for sure. Yeah, it definitely applies there. And you know, when I hear like a lot of really smart, self-reflexive Jungians when they talk about the crazy orange tyrant man, I just
Yeah.
go,
Oh,
ugh, I,
100%.
I can't take what your critique very seriously because you're caught in that othering too and
Yes.
dehumanizing and all of that.
Yeah, and I like it doesn't at all mean that you can't criticize and you can't find problematic and that you can't think that something is in danger. But if that response to something requires you to enact the very value that the very thing that you're trying to defend against, again, we're back at square one. You can't play that game. So,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter the human, and maybe in fact the worse the human, the the bigger the challenge to not erase their humanity in in whatever you're critiquing and trying to defend against from them. But I think that's the if you lose that, you've lost the battle. You've lost
Mm,
the war. If even if you win a battle in that, you've simply participating in what they're doing, and you're doing it the same way.
mm.
I
Great.
think.
Yeah, I'm with you. Dylan, thanks so much. This has been a really great conversation, as usual.
Same. I just find spaces where we can explore important, valuable topics. It's always a gift and time well spent.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Yeah.